The morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only January can deliver. Margaret stood on the porch of the rented cabin, breathing in air so cold it made her teeth ache, watching as dawn painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. At her side, Kaiser shifted his weight, his dark eyes scanning the tree, line with that quiet alertness she'd come to. Associate with her German shepherd over their 6 years together. Beautiful, isn't it? Rachel emerged from the cabin, already dressed in her expensive hiking gear, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "I'm so glad we did this, Mom. You need to get out more since you retired." Margaret smiled, though the comment stung slightly. She'd been teaching high school biology for 42 years before hanging up her lab coat last June. The transition had been harder than she'd anticipated. All that sudden emptiness where purpose used to be. But she had Kaiser, and she had moments like this, and she was learning that perhaps that was enough. "Tom's making pancakes," Rachel continued, checking her fitness watch. "We should eat and get started early. I want to be back before dark." The plan had been Rachel's idea, a family winter hike around Hawthorne Lake, a glacial body of water nestled in the Adirondacks. About 2 hours from Rachel and Tom's home in Albany, Margaret's grandson Lucas had been dragged, along with the typical enthusiasm of a 16-year-old separated from his gaming system. But even he seemed slightly awed by the landscape. When they'd arrived yesterday evening, inside, the cabin smelled of coffee and maple syrup. Tom stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the focused intensity he brought to everything. He was a good man. Margaret had long ago concluded, perhaps a bit too certain of himself, but devoted to Rachel and Lucas. He treated Margaret with unfailing kindness after her husband, David, had died 2 years ago, during what should have been their golden years together. "Morning, Margaret," Tom said cheerfully. "Kaiser get his breakfast?" He did indeed. Margaret poured herself coffee, watching as Kaiser settled near the fireplace, his massive head resting on his paws. She'd gotten him just before David's diagnosis, a retirement gift to herself, a companion for the morning walks she'd planned. She hadn't known then that Kaiser would become her anchor through hospice, through funeral arrangements, through the bewildering loneliness of a house that had once held two. Lucas emerged from his room, earbuds already in place, nodding vaguely in Margaret's direction before collapsing at the table. The boy was at that difficult age, all angles and awkwardness, still growing into himself. Margaret felt a surge of affection for him anyway. They ate efficiently. Rachel was always efficient, and within the hour were bundled in layers, ready to face the wilderness. The trail around Hawthorne Lake was well marked, a relatively easy 8-mile loop that would take them through pine forests and along the lake's edge, offering spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. "Actually," Tom said as they gathered their packs, "I was looking at the map last night. If we cut across the lake here," he pointed to a spot on his phone screen, "we save almost 40 minutes. The ice has been solid for 6 weeks now. Plenty of people have crossed." Margaret looked at the map, then out at the lake visible through the trees. It did look solid, a vast expanse of white, unmarked except for the faint traces of previous hikers, paths crossing its surface like tentative handwriting. "I don't know," she began, but Rachel was already nodding. "That makes sense. We could be back by 2 instead of 4. Lucas has homework he's been putting off." Lucas shrugged, which they all took as agreement. Margaret felt the familiar tug of being the cautious one, the voice of hesitation in a family of doers. She'd spent her career teaching the scientific method, preaching careful observation and measured conclusions. But sometimes she wondered if it had made her too hesitant, too aware of all the things that could go wrong. "All right," she said finally. "Let's see how it looks when we get there." They set off into the forest, following a trail marked with blue blazes on the trees. The snow was perhaps 8 inches deep, fresh from 2 days ago, and it crunched satisfyingly beneath their boots. Kaiser trotted ahead, then circled back, then ranged ahead again, his usual pattern on walks, checking on his pack, ensuring everyone was accounted for. The forest was cathedral quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after snowfall, when the world seems wrapped in cotton. Margaret found herself relaxing into the rhythm of walking, feeling her muscles warm and stretch, her mind settling into the peaceful emptiness that physical exertion can bring. After 40 minutes, they emerged from the trees onto the lake's edge. Hawthorne Lake stretched before them, perhaps half a mile across at this point, its surface a sweep of white, interrupted only by the dark. Shapes of ice fishing shelters in the distance. The far shore was visible, a dark line of evergreens against the brilliant sky. "See?" Tom said triumphantly. "Solid as concrete. Look, you can even see where snowmobiles have crossed." He was right. Several sets of tracks crisscrossed the ice, along with the boot prints of previous hikers. It looked perfectly safe. Margaret felt foolish for her earlier hesitation, but Kaiser had stopped moving. Margaret noticed it first because the leash went taut in her hand. She looked down to find her dog standing absolutely still, his gaze fixed on the lake, his entire body rigid with attention. As she watched, his ears, normally erect and alert, pressed flat against his skull. "What's wrong, boy?" she asked, crouching beside him. Kaiser didn't look at her. His eyes remained locked on the ice, and a low whine emerged from his throat, a sound she'd rarely heard from him, and never on their walks. "Come on, Kaiser," she encouraged, standing and taking a step toward the lake. Kaiser didn't move. She tugged gently on the leash. He planted his paws and pulled backward, his claws scrabbling against the packed snow at the trail's edge. "What's his problem?" Rachel asked, already several steps onto the ice. "I don't know. He seems upset." Tom laughed, a friendly sound without malice. "He's probably never seen a frozen lake before, Margaret. Dogs get spooked by strange things. My cousin's lab is terrified of umbrellas." "Kaiser's not usually afraid of anything," Margaret said slowly. But doubt crept into her voice even as she spoke. What did she really know about what Kaiser had or hadn't encountered in his life before she'd adopted him? He'd been 3 years old when she got him from the rescue organization. His history, largely unknown. "Mom, we really should get going," Rachel said, glancing at her watch. "The weather forecast mentioned possible snow this afternoon. I don't want to get caught in it." Margaret looked down at Kaiser again. He was staring at the ice with an intensity that seemed almost human, his dark eyes moving across the surface as if reading something written there. She felt a flutter of unease in her stomach, a whisper of instinct that said, "Pay attention." But attention to what? The ice looked fine. The temperature had been well below freezing for weeks. Other people had clearly crossed safely. What evidence did she have beyond a dog's reluctance? She was a scientist, she reminded herself. A rational person. She'd spent her career teaching students to rely on observable facts, not feelings or hunches. The ice was solid. That was the observable fact. "It's all right, boy," she said to Kaiser, her voice more confident than she felt. She wrapped the leash more firmly around her hand and took a decisive step onto the ice. "Come on, it's safe." Kaiser came, but everything about his body language screamed resistance. His legs moved stiffly, as if each step required conscious effort to override some deeper command. His head swung from side to side, and Margaret noticed that he was trying to distribute his weight differently than usual, his paws spreading wider with each step. Tom and Rachel were already 20 feet ahead, chatting about their kitchen renovation plans. Lucas trailed behind them, earbuds firmly in place, oblivious to everything but whatever music filled his head. The morning sun glinted off the snow-covered ice, beautiful and blinding. Margaret focused on walking, on keeping her balance on the slippery surface. Beneath her boots, the ice was smooth in some places, rough with frozen ripples in others. She could see small cracks here and there, surface imperfections, the natural texture of frozen water. Nothing concerning. They moved farther from shore, and Margaret realized they were now well and truly committed. The opposite shore still seemed far away, but looking back, their starting point was equally distant. They'd reached the point of no return, that place where turning back makes as little sense as pressing forward. The wind picked up, swirling loose snow into small devils that danced across the ice. Margaret shivered despite her warm layers. Kaiser beside her stopped walking again. This time he sat, abruptly, heavily, as if someone had commanded him to heel. He looked up at Margaret, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. She'd seen Kaiser happy, playful, sleepy, alert. She'd never seen him afraid. Until now. "Kaiser," she said softly. "What is it? What do you—" "For heaven's sake, Margaret." Tom had turned back, exasperation clear on his face. "We're almost there. Just pick him up if you have to. He weighs 80 pounds, Tom. Then drag him. We're halfway across." Margaret felt her cheeks burn despite the cold. Here she was, the difficult one, holding everyone up. Her family was waiting, Rachel checking her watch again, Lucas finally pulling out one earbud to see what the delay was, Tom's friendly face settling into lines of frustration. She gave the leash a firmer tug. "Kaiser, come now!" Kaiser didn't move. The whine that came from his throat rose in pitch, becoming almost a sound of desperate communication. If he could speak, Margaret thought suddenly, he would be screaming at her. But he couldn't speak, and she couldn't read his mind, and her family was waiting. She tugged harder on the leash. That's when she heard it. The sound was like a distant rifle shot, sharp and high, echoing across the empty lake. Everyone froze. Tom's eyes widened. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Even Lucas pulled out his other earbud, suddenly alert. The sound came again, deeper this time, more resonant, a crack that seemed to emanate from beneath their feet and travel through the ice like a pulse, through living tissue. "Nobody move," Tom said quietly. All his bravado had evaporated. His face had gone pale, making his sun-flushed cheeks stand out like flags. "The ice is unstable." Margaret looked down. At first, she saw nothing different, just the same white surface, the same small surface cracks. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw it, a hairline fracture thin as spider silk, running from where Kaiser sat toward a patch of ice 10 feet to their left that looked somehow darker, somehow different from the surrounding surface. "There must be a spring," Tom continued, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter everything, or a current. "Upwelling water that keeps it from freezing solid." Kaiser remained utterly still, as if he understood that any movement might tip the balance. Margaret's hands began to shake. The truth crashed over her with the force of an avalanche. He had known. From the very beginning, from that first moment at the shore when his ears had flattened against his skull, Kaiser had known something was wrong with this ice. She had ignored him. They all had. They'd dismissed his panic as irrational, his fear as ignorance, his refusal as simple stubbornness. They'd made him cross the ice anyway because they knew better, because they were human and he was just a dog, because their reasoning trumped his instinct. And now they were standing above deep water, trapped on ice that Kaiser's ancient wolf-born instincts had recognized as fatally thin. The ice groaned again, and this time Margaret saw the fracture widen. The dark line spread like a wound opening, and water, impossibly black against all that. White began to seep up through the crack. It pooled on the surface, turning the snow gray. "We need to spread out," Tom said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Distribute our weight. Move very slowly back the way we came. Lucas, you first. You're the lightest." "Dad!" Lucas's voice cracked, and suddenly he was a little boy again, terrified and looking to his parents for salvation. "It's okay," Rachel said, though her face told a different story. "Just move slowly, baby. Slide your feet, don't step." "No," Margaret heard herself say. "No sudden movements, Lucas. One at a time. You go first, nice and slow." Lucas began to shuffle backward, each movement agonizingly measured. The ice complained with every shift of his weight. Small sounds, pops and creaks that seemed impossibly loud in the winter silence. Margaret's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her fingertips behind her eyes. She found herself praying to a God she'd stopped believing in after. "David died, please let him make it. He's just a boy, please." Lucas moved 10 feet, 20, 30. He was going to make it. He was light enough, his weight was dispersed enough. Margaret felt tears of relief freeze on her cheeks. Then Rachel began to move, and the loudest crack yet split the air. Margaret looked down. The fracture had branched, spawning new lines that ran in multiple directions like veins spreading from a central heart. One of those lines ran directly beneath her feet. She felt the ice tilt just slightly, just enough to notice, as if she were standing on a floor that had suddenly become a ramp. "Margaret!" Tom lunged toward her, his scientist's caution forgotten in the face of his mother-in-law's danger. "Stay there." The command emerged in her teacher voice, the one that had silenced unruly classrooms for 4 decades. "You'll make it worse." "Stay where you are." Tom froze, his face anguished, his hand still outstretched toward her. Kaiser made his choice then. He lunged forward, throwing his full 80 pounds against Margaret's legs, hitting her just behind the knees. She stumbled, her legs buckling, and fell forward onto her hands and knees. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, and for a moment she couldn't process what was happening. Then she heard the sound, a crack like breaking glass magnified 1,000 times, and felt the ice beneath where she'd been standing simply disappear. Black water surged up through a hole the size of a car tire, hungry and lethal. The edges of the hole glowed with an eerie translucence, and Margaret could see the terrible depth beneath, the dark water that would have swallowed her whole, that would have stopped her heart in seconds with its impossible cold. She scrambled backward on hands and knees, her gloves sliding on the ice, her knees screaming with impact. Kaiser was there, pressed against her side, his body pushing her, herding her away from the spreading, all the way his ancestors had herded, sheep away from cliffs. Tom reached them, his hands closing around Margaret's arm. He pulled her upright, and together, Tom, Margaret, and Kaiser, they began to move toward Rachel and Lucas, away from the hole that continued to spread, the water lapping at its edges and freezing into new ice even as it expanded. "Run!" Rachel screamed. "Mom, run!" They ran as much as one can run on uncertain ice, their feet sliding and skidding, their arms windmilling for balance. Behind them, Margaret could hear the ice continuing to fracture, could hear more water surging up through new holes. Later, she would learn that the entire center of Hawthorne Lake was unreliable in winter, that a warm spring fed from underground kept the ice dangerously thin, that 3 people had drowned there over the years. But in that moment, all she knew was the terror of flight, the desperate need to reach solid ground, and the warm weight of Kaiser's body running beside her, his leash still wrapped around her hand. They reached the shore, their original shore, the one they'd left from, and collapsed in the snow. For a long moment, no one could speak. They simply sat there, gasping and shaking, while their heartbeats slowly returned to something approaching normal. Margaret's hands trembled as she buried them in Kaiser's thick ruff. He leaned against her, panting but calm now, as if his job was complete, as if he'd done what he'd set out to do and could rest now. Tom had his arm around Rachel, who was crying silently, her face buried in her hands. Lucas sat apart, staring at the lake, at the visible holes in the ice where they'd been standing just minutes before. His phone lay forgotten in the snow beside him. "He knew," Margaret finally said, her voice hoarse and strange. "From the very beginning, he knew." Tom nodded slowly, and Margaret saw shame etched in every line of his face, in the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. "I'm sorry. I should have listened. I thought—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "We all thought we knew better," Rachel said quietly, wiping her eyes. "We saw what we wanted to see, a shortcut, a solid surface, a way to save time. But he could sense what we couldn't." Margaret looked at her dog, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since she'd brought him home. 6 years ago, she'd loved him, certainly. She'd cared for him, walked him, fed him, brought him to the vet, bought him toys and treats. She talked to him, slept with him, curled at the foot of her bed, cried into his fur after David died. But had she ever truly respected him? Had she ever considered that his perspective might be valid, even superior to her own? She'd thought of him as a companion, a friend, even a family member. But she'd never thought of him as someone whose judgment she should trust absolutely, whose instincts might be sharper than her science. Kaiser hadn't seen the danger any more than they had, but he'd sensed it through vibrations in the ice too subtle for human perception, through sounds beyond the range of human hearing, through senses that 10,000 years of wolf evolution had honed to perfection. his instincts, inherited from ancestors who'd survived countless winters, had screamed warnings that their modern, rational minds had dismissed as inconvenient. "Thank you," she whispered into his fur. "Thank you for being stubborn. Thank you for being smarter than us. Thank you for saving my life." Kaiser's tail thumped against the snow, once, twice, 3 times. They walked back around the lake's perimeter, the long way, the safe way, the way they should have gone from the beginning. No one complained about the extra distance. No one checked their watches or worried about schedules. They moved through the winter landscape in silence, a reverent quiet broken only by the crunch of boots in snow and the occasional call of a winter bird. Margaret watched Kaiser as they walked, noticing things she'd never paid attention to before. The way his ears swiveled constantly, catching sounds she couldn't hear. The way he paused at certain points to lift his nose and test the air, gathering information invisible to human senses. The way he navigated the trail with a confidence born of perception she couldn't begin to understand. When they finally reached the car, as the sun began its descent and the threatened snow started to fall in fat, lazy flakes, Margaret made a decision. She opened the back hatch of Tom's SUV and Kaiser jumped in, settling himself on his blanket. But before she closed the hatch, Margaret crouched beside him and took his face in both her hands. "From now on," she said clearly, looking into his dark eyes, "if you're afraid, I'm afraid. If you refuse, I refuse. I promise you, Kaiser. I promise." His tail wagged, sweeping across the floor of the cargo area. He licked her hand once, gently, as if sealing the agreement. Rachel came to stand beside her mother, still pale but composed again. "That goes for all of us," she said firmly. "Right, Tom? Lucas?" "Absolutely," Tom said quietly. "I'll never doubt him again." Lucas nodded, then reached out to scratch Kaiser behind the ears. Something Margaret had rarely seen her teenage grandson do. "You're a good boy," Lucas said softly. "The best boy." They drove home through the gathering snow, the wipers rhythmically clearing the windshield, the heater blowing warm air into the cabin. Margaret kept her hand on Kaiser's head, her fingers buried in his thick winter coat. She thought about instinct, about the ancient knowledge encoded in blood and bone, about the different kinds of intelligence that exist in the world. She'd come to the lake that morning, believing she understood things, believing her education and experience had given her the tools to navigate the world. She returned with the humbling knowledge that she had much to learn, and that some of the best teachers have 4 legs and cannot speak a single word of English. The snow fell harder, coating the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it, transforming the familiar landscape into something mysterious and new. In the cargo area, Kaiser slept, his sides rising and falling with the steady rhythm of peaceful dreams. Margaret watched the snow fall and felt something shift inside her, a letting go of certainty, an opening to wisdom she'd been too proud to recognize. She'd spent 42 years teaching biology, explaining to students how evolution shaped life, how instinct and intelligence were inherited, how survival favored those who could adapt. She taught it all from textbooks and lab experiments, with the clinical detachment of someone observing from outside. Today, Kaiser had given her a different kind of education. He taught her that love without respect is incomplete, that intelligence comes in forms she'd never considered, that sometimes the bravest thing is to trust what you cannot explain. He had saved them all by refusing to be convinced, by trusting what he knew to be true, even when they wouldn't listen. It was a lesson Margaret knew she would carry for the rest of her life, however many years remained. She would remember this day, this dog, this moment when she learned to listen to voices that couldn't speak in words. The snow continued to fall as they drove toward home, and Margaret closed her eyes, her hand still resting on Kaiser's sleeping form, and gave thanks for stubborn dogs and second chances.